Um, This is Senate Appropriations, and we're taking up H-165, which is an act related to universal school meals. I'm happy that we are joined by Heather Boucher, the agency interim secretary of the Agency of Education. And I see that you've given. Oh, we've taken your chair.
There's a chair here.
Oh, is there?
Oh, yeah, we did switch
It's a
chairs.
very horrible
Why
chair.
would we do that?
Oh.
Well,
It's time for
No, it's fine. Take it.
I did, there is a cushion.
Yeah.
You just go like that.
The switch chairs and that.
Swap that.
No, it's totally.
No, this one really would be the.
Well, the reason we moved that.
I mean, is it gonna break?
No.
Like-
No, I moved it this
Big-
morning so people could walk behind the witness chair.
Somehow, when it comes to money, we seem to have a lot of seats filled. And so we appreciate your coming today. Obviously, this is school meals. If you could speak to the agency's issues around this. This is not something that hasn't been discussed here in this building over time, sort of what might have gotten us to here. And your view, of course, everything comes down to the issue around the spending and the cost, and appreciate your willingness to come in today and share your views as it relates to this proposal and what it means in terms of cost. And I know that last year, and I see staff from Joint Fiscal is here, there was a lot of discussion. There was assertions that this could be done with very little money, and there was a dispute over the estimate that was produced by our Joint Fiscal Office. But I understand this year there's agreement between the agency and JFO staff that the cost is close to $30 million. And so if you could, I think you're shaking your head, so you're in agreement that there's not a disagreement on the potential costs.
To my knowledge, I think as I'll share my testimony from the administration's perspective, it's where that comes from and where that comes from long term. It's the change. I'm not sure everyone had a chance to see this, and I don't tend to like to just read, so I'll try and animate this a little bit more. But I first want to start, Madam Chair, thank you for providing the opportunity for AOE to provide testimony on H-165. I'm going to start by appreciating the opportunity to clarify that the administration does not support creating a permanent universal meals program this year. And we have been on the record throughout the session. That has not changed. While we share the belief of many that access to good, healthy, and nutritious meals, sorry, that was my phone, is an important element of success in student learning, growth, and development, we have concerns about the cost of the program and the fact that all Vermonters will be asked to subsidize the meals of affluent Vermonters. It's important to be clear that the administration is in favor of providing free school meals to all Vermont children and families who need the extra support. However, we saw the same concerns shared last year about paying for affluent students' lunches with taxes that will impact lower income families. While the bill uses education fund surplus this year to pay for the initiative, in the out years, should we not have a surplus and economic forecasts show some clouds on the horizon, it could result in up to 3 cents of property tax pressure. There are many critical needs in education, from career technical education to mental health to school construction. Many essential elements of our school system that impact student learning and well-being demand our attention. It is our job collectively, yours as the General Assembly and ours as the administration and the oversight and support body for Vermont's education system, to determine the highest need given our finite resources. So our opposition to funding universal meals this year is respectfully grounded in the knowledge that our current resources should be devoted to the highest need, and we must ensure that our education system remains sustainable into the future. Our education fund surpluses will not continue unbounded into the future. We should invest our surpluses now thoughtfully in the interest of serving students, in particular students who are our most vulnerable students. I do want to highlight AOE's engagement on this bill to date and going forward. Our State Director of Child Nutrition Programs, Rosie Kruger, who some of you I know from other committee work, who is a leader in this area, not only in Vermont, but nationally, has worked with each committee that has taken up the bill in the interest of ensuring that should you pass the proposal, the policy you enact will meet 3 important and key tests. First, that any program that does pass allows Vermont to draw down the maximum federal money for universal meals, and that will thereby reduce the overall cost of the program to Vermont citizens. Second, that any program that does pass does not violate federal law or regulation on school meals, so that Vermont students can continue to access school lunch, whether free or paid. And third, that any program that does pass is implementable by both the state and by school food authorities, so that Vermont students can continue to access school lunch, whether free or paid. And the reason I'm mapping these out is because some of you already know how complex and, dare I say, intricate the federal laws are around child nutrition. And so it's really, that's how we're trying to really, we just want to make sure that whatever is done, we stay in our position from administration's perspective, whatever is done, we need to actually hold a line on like the things that can be done. Rosie's been really, she's the state expert on those particular points. By the way, as an aside, she's on a much needed vacation right now, or she would probably be here.
Probably someplace sunny and warm.
I'm not sure, maybe. And then I want to close by saying that this is an important policy to get right. Despite our concerns about funding, we want to ensure that any program that ultimately results is efficient, effective, and ultimately works well for Vermont students. And in that spirit, I do appreciate the opportunity to join you this afternoon, and I'm happy to work with you on the proposal.
I wanted to ask if you could clarify, because one of the things we know that certain towns, if they meet a threshold of free and reduced hot lunch, then under the federal rules, I believe they can provide
Certain towns,
certain schools.
certain schools.
Yes. So, but you have to be able, so in order to draw down the federal dollars or to meet that, you have to collect household income. Is that correct? How do you, you're talking about the complexity, and I'm just wondering how, what it takes to draw down those federal dollars.
So in one program, the community program, based on a certain measure of poverty in the community itself, but then also the district has to actually offset some of those costs with their own dollars. They are able to provide those meals. It's CEP, community something program. I think it's eligibility, thank you. I was like, it's not education. So I think that's one piece. There's also, I'm not as familiar with the details, but there's another one that was new to me. So on here. I can get back to you on that, Madam Chair. There was another program. I have a note on it now, I can't find it, I apologize, that had, it's something like, something to TWO, like it sounded like, it was not a program that I was familiar with before this year. And so I'm not entirely sure whether that would address the issue you're talking about, but it may. We are actually doing some other work. And by the way, I should say, this is a very important topic, universal meals at the federal level too. So the federal USDA, education to some extent are actually trying to do a lot of work in this area. We actually have an opportunity for public comment right now on the CEP program. And what that does is allow state agencies or any stakeholders, legislators, of course, to weigh in on how the feds are actually defining that program. And I'm saying that because I do think, I think there's a lot at play right now. And so I think that's what is important to know. So what CEP looks like right now, I mean, there's no guarantee. Yeah, I mean, again, Rosie could answer those questions much better, and I apologize that she's not able to be here. But I do think that's one of the things that is important for high level context to keep in mind, that there is a lot of there's a lot of support for universal meals. There's also a lot of interest in exactly how to get that right. And so I think it would be, if we move in a long-term fashion in one way, and then it's potentially out of step, I think that would be problematic for us, because we have worked hard to be able to get all students who can free and reduced hot lunch and breakfast.
Just wanted to clarify that other questions that we want to ask of the agency. Yes, Senator.
Yeah, I'd like to broach a little more the alternative sources of funding. Now, it's been my experience the last 6 years or so. Whenever we suggest an alternative funding source, the governor opposes it. And we just did sports betting, which we're doing, using that, some of the money for problem gambling. I don't know that it's gonna raise 20 million to cover the cost. We have cannabis, which we're doing after school programs. Perhaps we should have put it into free lunch. But I feel like it's a double-edged sword. And I don't know what funding source we would use that the governor would approve.
Well, this is Ed Fund. And
I understand, no, I understand that. And my constituents don't want me to vote for an increase in their property taxes to pay for this program. Shouldn't say my, many of my constituents are opposed to the bill, not because they don't want to see food, but they don't want to see an increase in the property taxes. There is also some who, as you pointed out, who feel that, you know, that people are not taking advantage of the free meals that they can get from the feds. They're not filling out the forms or whatever. I don't know if that's true. But my point is, if we picked an alternative source to the Ed Fund, the governor would not support it. That's the history. So we're in a catch-22 here.
but the administration doesn't support this either.
I understand that. So, but I'm just saying, if we picked an alternative,
Well, I don't know, those alternatives are somewhat elusive, particularly when we get to the budget, as you know so well. One of the things that becomes very hard, and I don't know to what you can speak to this, it's my recollection that school meals were put in place when, back in World War II, when they, people being drafted, the families were so poor that the kids, the youth being drafted, in fact, showed signs of childhood malnutrition. So it is, I guess, what we're debating here, and what seems to be part of this discussion is universal meals is equated with chronic and persistent hunger. And part of what you're talking about here is around the more affluent children when you get into a universal scenario, and the cost that that brings with it, because that would all be on the state's dime, and that's why there's the 29 million, which we need to. There's no appropriation in this bill, so to move the bill out, we have to include the $29 million appropriation to go with it. So I just want to be clear that that money would have to travel here in the bill, because it's not funded separately in the budget at this point.
I think also, Madam Chair, this one's tricky because I think the perspective is that so everyone would have higher tax base, and that would actually be, you know, there would be students that don't necessarily need free and reduced lunch who would have access to that, and it would be being paid for by everyone, including the very families that really need those services through taxation.
So there's an equity issue. Someone said, yes, the towns that of the incomes or the students are so poor that they get the universal because they're meeting that threshold. Their property taxes are going to go up to fund the students that are in the most affluent communities in the state.
And they're already served by CEP, so.
Yes. So
That
they
community,
gain
that's
nothing, but they'll pick up the cost. Senator Starr.
Yeah, I don't, you know, Rosie does an excellent job.
She does a way better job than me.
Well, I guess I wouldn't answer that until I get to work.
On this
with you.
topic, absolutely. I
But you'd have to really pick up the pace to keep up with it. But I don't agree with your statement that, I mean, it's kind of misleading about the 3 cents. I mean, if things change and we don't get the projections that we're supposed to, the monies that we're supposed to get, it could cost. Well, heck, it could rain this afternoon too, so we all better buy umbrellas and, you know, putting propaganda in a testimony, I think, so a little bit off.
So Star, we're gonna have joint fiscal speak to this too, because I don't want it to appear that it's just that 29 or that 3 cents is coming for the first time here. I wasn't sure I was clear on it, but I want to make sure that you notice Julia Richter's on our schedule. And that's why I mentioned before there've been disputes about the cost, and this year there's consensus. So if I wasn't clear on that, I apologize.
And, you know, I don't know how many meetings I've been to in the last 50 years. But for 21 years, I went to school board meetings twice a month. And we instituted free meals in our school way, way, way back then. And I've never had one complaint from a parent, a teacher, a principal, a superintendent. I mean, everything that I don't hide either. I mean, I'm out there usually sitting in the front row, so if they want to shoot at me, they can. But this is one of the best programs that we've ever put in place since I've been in Montpelier. And I mean, I'm the moderator at town meetings and the school meetings. Just get praise about this particular program. And I think, you know, we would make a major mistake if we didn't fund it and do it. And about beating on the little wealthy kids getting a free meal, I've looked at the demographics over in my community, and the same people that are paying for little Johnny and little Sally's lunch, the same people that are paying the bulk of the taxes in town. So if they get a little break on a meal, I mean, I don't see anything wrong with that. But, so I just wanted to.
Well, we know that you spend a lot of time in taking testimony, and obviously food service directors are very passionate about the importance of good nutrition. Other questions of the, yes.
I think maybe it's for JFO. There was 2 things I remembered from last year that when we passed it last year, that was going to be like a census year, and we were hoping that there would be more federal money available because we were going to be either finding something out over this last year, and I didn't know.
I have to come back.
Okay.
Even through email, this email, probably let me know.
Okay.
Or maybe Julia knows the answer to that, and we can hear from her.
And independent schools, or approved independent schools, they're part of it now this year. That's not a new addition to the code.
I have to look at that. Part of what I'm hesitating about is that a lot of the rules were relaxed through COVID. And I don't know exactly which ones, but there were a lot of restrictions that had been previously in place. Perhaps some related to public and independent schools, and I just would have to get confirmation on whether those
Well, maybe,
have always been there, or if those were for the past 3 years and we're reverting back to it just being public schools.
JFO.
Well, we have Julia here, so we can have her come and testify next. No further questions. Thank you.
I would like to, Dave, and this is a separate subject other than this. I do have some questions about adult basic education and funding, and would like to make sure that we are able to connect on that. We asked a bunch of questions in here, and the budget presentation for the mock joint fiscal has been contacting the agency, and we need to now sorting through that.
Okay, sure. I can answer
I
those
think we
questions.
need to
and
get
We need to
through
get
this
through
bill and that, but I wanted to make sure I raised that.
Absolutely.
And I need to have the attention of the agency.
Thank you.
Afternoon. For the record, I'm Julia from the Joint Fiscal Office. Madam Chair, there are a few questions I can answer now, or would you like me to start with the fiscal note? How would you like to proceed?
Why don't you answer the questions, although I would think the fiscal note may, in fact, answer at least some of them.
Sure.
Around the 29.
Yeah, so
estimate.
I can sort of walk through the fiscal note and then flag where there were questions, respond to those questions. Okay, so I see that folks have the fiscal note in front of them. It's also posted, I believe, on the committee's page. So H165, the Universal School Meals Bill, very high level. It creates an ongoing state funding of school meals, so breakfast and lunch for all publicly funded students at no charge to students and families. It also offers the option for independent schools to draw those funds for publicly tuition students, and this is the same, to get to your question, Senator Kirchlich, as last year's Universal School Meals Bill. The schools will be reimbursed for the provision of meals through the Ed Fund as categorical aid, and as the chair mentioned, the current draft of the bill does not appropriate any funds for the program in FY24. JFO estimates the bill will cost $29 million from the education fund in fiscal year 2024. This is similar to the projection last year. So there was the estimate last year. We also estimated it would be $29 million. Based on preliminary data, it's coming in a bit over $27 million. So the cost and the estimate were pretty close. And we worked very closely with Rosie from AOE to reach consensus in our estimates both last year and this year.
And that was, my recollection is that was disputed last year, that there were some suggestions that the cost would be minimal because of what would somehow we would be able to demonstrate something. And I don't remember the details, but I thought that was an area where the proponents were suggesting something much less than the 29.
Yes.
And I don't mean to go back on that, but I gather you've vetted the figure, and that's you feel pretty confident in that.
So we felt that was the best estimate we could reach last year, and we did reach that estimate in consensus with AOE. So AOE was not one of the parties that was disputing our estimate. And because the estimate was relatively close last year, and we have the updated data, we feel more confident in being able to project the costs. And I can talk, we're estimating $29 million for fiscal year 24. There are a number of potential federal changes. There's things that are happening in the bigger ether outside of Vermont. And to the extent that those changes happen, as well as there's changes in student behavior and school district behavior, there's a range of costs. So we're estimating, down the line, the cost of universal meals could range between 20 and 31 million. And we're projecting for the coming fiscal year, based on the best data we have available, that it will be 29 million. That's the needed appropriation. And to get to another question regarding the 3 cents on the property tax rate. So as the committee is, I think, well aware, the education fund is in part funded by property taxes, and those property taxes are adjusted to make up for the obligations on the education fund that are not being covered by non-property revenue streams. And a general ballpark that we use is about 10 million of expenditures results in about
1 cent.
1 cent. So we did, JFO was mandated in the universal meals bill last year to come back with a report about potential revenue sources the legislature asked us to look into, as well as costs. And that report did include that our best estimate is 29 million, and that would be about 3 cents on both the homestead and the non-homestead property tax rate. A couple other points that I wanted to get to in moving through the fiscal note. I think it's helpful to keep in mind in the conversation of the cost is that the cost is really dependent on a few factors. And so that's why we have the range. So it's dependent on the percentage of students that are eligible for free and reduced price meals. So I know Interim Secretary Boucher was talking about the free and reduced lunch programs. There's that community eligibility provision, which essentially, big picture, says, okay, how many kids in the school are directly certified? So through another program. And if there's a certain percentage, then that school can participate in the community eligibility provision. So that's one way that we can draw down federal funds. And then the other way is provision 2, which is getting at the chair's point of collecting those free and reduced price meal applications. And so the more students that qualify for free and reduced lunch, the more federal funds that can be drawn down. And
can we do both of those, or is it one or the other? Like some schools do the CEP and some do the forms?
You'd all want to do a
Exactly.
CEP if you could qualify.
CEP will draw down more federal funds.
Right, obviously, I didn't know if you just had to do one or the other if you're doing a statewide program.
So the way that the bill is drafted, and I do know that Beth, who is working on the bill from Ledge Council, is in the room, but it requires for school districts to draw down a maximum amount of federal funds, and so that's through CEP, and then they can't qualify through CEP. Then provision 2, and that gets to another question. I'm sorry, I forget who asked the question on the committee. But last year there was a conversation of potentially increased federal funds, and the conversation of maybe we'll have more federal funds. And so,
But we're still right at the same place this year. We're still.
so what we're seeing this year is based on past October, there was a smaller percentage of students who qualified for free and reduced price meals. And in conversations with AOE, this could be that there was not the same drive to fill out those forms, but I can't speak to that. On the other hand, this coming summer, there will be the Medicaid pilot, which essentially students will be automatically enrolled in free and reduced lunch if they qualify for Medicaid. So the figure, our estimate.
They're just on categorically. And so that, if you could clarify that, are we talking about summer meals as well? When we're talking about what this bill provides?
No, so this bill provides in-school meals. There has been some conversation going on about the pandemic EBT meal card, and the way that works is basically if students participated in the community eligibility provision, National School Lunch Program, then they can receive that from the federal government. But we're really talking about breakfast and lunch being served in school. In this bill specifically.
Okay, because we have heard about people getting the EBT cards.
Yeah, so I think that it's sort of one of those topics that's tangentially connected because participation in the meal programs can make students eligible for participation in other federal meal programs.
And the reason, I'll be perfectly honest, somebody we know who has a high-level administrative job, and got an EBT card for, what, $120 for the summer?
Yeah,
And that family went to Rome last year on vacation and Paris this year. And so needless to say, that, and the governor's own staff, apparently several people got the EBT cards, and it raised considerable consternation around the benefit. So it's helpful to understand what generated those cards.
so I think in that specific instance, I believe that the school, the child who qualified for the card attended a school that participated in the community eligibility provision. And part of the EBT, pandemic EBT program said, okay, looking at it right now, if that student was in a school that was participating in CEP, then all the students in that school would receive the PEP coverage.
Can you get that eligibility, but just since it's universal meals now, it's not all schools are participating, all students have that eligibility to this.
So in the community eligibility provision, so the way that the community eligibility.
Right, well, I get that CEP part, but if you're not in CEP, and you're just collecting the income forms for the parents, you would be eligible for the EBT card, unless you were met the income eligibility.
I'm not sure.
So I
I'm
just
not
wondered-
sure if a student who's participating in provision 2 school would automatically qualify for the PEBT card. I don't know.
Basically, aren't all schools in provision 2 that aren't CEP, right?
Yes.
So that's everybody.
Yes,
So I just wondered if everybody really qualifies for the EBT card.
I'm not sure. I can only speak right now to certainty of the CEP.
Okay, Senator, are you finished with it? I think that's a critical question because, do you know the answer to that, Secretary Boucher?
For the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education, and the agency's Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs. Apologies for joining late. I was with one of your colleague committees. So Pandemic EBT or PEBT is a program that is jointly run by the Department of Children and Families and the Agency of Education. It's one of our pandemic-related programs. It provides a temporary food benefit to pre-K through 12 students who would normally receive free or reduced price meals at school. Pandemic EBT, the benefits are $8.18 a day per day that an eligible student has a COVID-19 related absence from September 2022 through January of 2023.
Is that program ending?
It will end in January of 2023.
That's right.
I'm
It's
90%
January 2023.
Past that date.
We
It's
just
already
like,
gone.
we're over.
This program is specifically this year.
So it's, if you had an absence in the fall, you're eligible for the benefit, right? So that's why it's continuing. To be eligible, and this is the eligibility question the committee had a moment ago, to be eligible for school PEBT benefits, children must have had absences from school due to COVID-related reason, and 2, be eligible to receive free and reduced price meals at school or attend a school offering free meals to all students through the community eligibility provision or provision 2. So I just want to agree with my colleague Julia, who was answering this earlier, to say that if you have a student, regardless of your income, if you have a student who attends a school that participates in one of these universal meals programs, then they are eligible for the benefit.
But that was all students, all schools participated in the universal school meal program last year.
That is correct. I want to double check that that's not, I want to double check that it's, that it applies to all of our participating schools and not.
And it's like
schools.
ARPA money, it's not, we're not saying it's part of the 29 million.
I think that's the important
Yes.
thing. All right, Senator Lyons and then Senator.
Yeah, so just, I think it continues. So the programs that we currently have that provide for food for kids, what is the timing on the determination of the number of kids who are eligible for those programs? So if we decide we have Medicaid eligibility, and then when the school's developing its budget, I'm trying to look at the very practical part of this. So all of these programs must have some time frame? And then how does the district know? And how does the district manage its budget recommendations and its property tax recommendations subsequently?
Yeah, great question. So it depends on the program that the school is participating in.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. So
So
can we look at those sort of deadlines or the timelines for each of the programs, or do you have that?
That may, actually, timing might be a problem because if you're collecting household income, and I know schools that qualified because the percentage of students was high enough, and then it went down. And so if they only knew, and so they would have built their budget before they would have had that experience. If that's what you're trying to get at.
Exactly.
And so you have to assume that that level of eligible students is going to be present when you start up the school year, but you're building the budget months before.
So I think that that is an excellent point and gets to the way that these two provisions work. The federal program, CEP, and Provision 2 essentially have a base year. And in that base year, they count the number of students in two different ways. We can go into the nitty-gritty, that would be helpful, but essentially there's a base year. We say, okay, X percentage of students in this school qualify for free and reduced lunch. And then in the following 3 or 4 years, that percentage carries through so that the school district can prepare and think ahead as to what percentage of their students will be drawing down the federal funds. And in the case of universal meals and this bill and the bill that passed last year, there's those funds that are being drawn down from the federal government for the free and reduced lunch kids. And then the state of Vermont is reimbursing the district for the rest of the meals that are served.
All right, Senator Starr and Senator.
Yeah, I was wondering, did JFO talk with anyone about increased meals that were served by the school districts? So that drove the cost up because earlier this year, it seems like some of the lunch providers said their meals were running up 10 to 13% higher than they were when the kids had to pay. So I was wondering, did you know if that got taken into account, additional meals?
Yeah, definitely. So the estimate took into account participation, which is what I think you're getting at, is in a pricing program. So in a pricing program, what you're getting at is there's one participation rate, and then if all meals are free, you would assume that there's an increased participation rate. So our estimate assumes that there's an increase in the participation rate. And by participation rate, it still refers to one meal per child. It's just that more children are deciding to take that meal.
Yes,
So
Senator.
the base year was what I was thinking about earlier, my question. So this year is a base year, if I remember from the discussions from last year, but this school year was a base year for calculating that.
Yeah, and I believe that the current draft of the bill makes it so that AOE has the discretion to require school districts to re-look into it or have a new base year. Looking at Beth, she's nodding. Gives AOE that discretion. So if it's looking like, you know, a school district could qualify for more federal funds, AOE could say to that school district, look, you need to go back into this.
So schools can make that, basically that request of the federal government, like I want a new base year. I thought it was just like every 7 years, the federal government said, this is your base year. It's something that we can choose what year we choose as the base year.
I believe so.
Yeah, I thought the last year was, the argument was, hey, it's going to be a base year. So when we collect all this forms, we're going to likely find out that we have more eligibility, but that didn't turn out to be.
Yeah, so there was that was one of the talking points that we were hearing last year, that there was a big push for filling out those forms, but we did see that there was a decrease in the number of students qualifying for free and reduced.
Was there a decrease in the number of people filling out the forms?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen the data. I've just seen the aggregated data from Rosie, but just to give you a sense, in fall of 2019, so that's pre-pandemic. So as the chair mentioned, during the pandemic, federal government provided universal meals, and then they stopped. So that's where this conversation arises. So the last data point we can look at is the fall of 2019, and there was a percentage of 38.23% of Vermont children qualified for free and reduced price meals. And then in October of 2022, which is the first month that we collected data, there was a percentage of 34.85% that qualified for reduced price meals. So those percentages can play a role in our range of 20 to 31 million. 20 being assuming a lot more qualify with the rule change that's.
Well, I'm looking at the clock. I can maybe ask my questions.
Well, we
Of
pushed,
JFO outside.
we pushed the menu conference up just a little bit. I don't know whether we're ready to move this bill. We're gonna have to amend it because it has no appropriation in it.
Well, that would be helpful to pay for it.
Because, yeah, I had other questions about the ed fund. So I don't know if we don't have time, then.
Well, I believe the yield bill assumes that it can accommodate it, but that's partly because we're still operating with some surplus. And that's what the Secretary Boucher was referring to. It's no different than the general fund where we've got this time limited kind of extra money, but once that goes away, so the issue that we've been grappling with here is what do we start? What's base, what's going to be an ongoing commitment versus one time that we're funding with this time limited period of extra revenues. Same thing is happening with the revenues into the ed fund. And we're seeing the trend of the revenues going into the ed fund. We're monitoring those. We just looked at them today and they are not as robust as they might be. So that's, so this, the fact that we've had some extra money coming in because of the sales tax has been a real big driver, is time limited. We're seeing that unwinding, the same as in the general fund.
And we talked a lot about the general fund, but we haven't really talked about the specifics in the ed fund. So that's why I just had questions like, well, what is the surplus? I haven't heard.
Well, we had to set aside the 9 million for the teachers, so I think it's down. Stephanie, it was 21 down to about.
Julia's gonna know the best on this one.
So talking about the surplus in the ed fund this year is challenging, and I won't go too deep into it. But even if all of those unreserved, unallocated dollars at the end of the prior year were to be put towards property taxes, we still would see an average property tax bill increase in the ed fund. So with that being said, there's on the bottom line, 102.9 million. So about $1 billion. No, sorry.
That's the revenue.
Sorry, 103 million. But even if all of those dollars were to go to property tax rates, the bill would still increase on average. And the yield construct does include assuming universal meals will be paid.
And we did have some extra, I know, because we've set aside the 9.1 for the retired teachers' pension payment. And I thought it was like 21 million, and then we reduced it by the 9 that we've had to reserve to fulfill that commitment on the COLA for teachers. So it's going down fairly quickly what's in there now.
The House passed out a yield bill that included a tax rate offset reserve, so just setting some of those funds aside of 22 million. And then the Senate construct has the 9.1 that's been reserved, and then a tax rate offset reserve of 13 million.
So that's what we're netting down to. But that's because we've had fairly robust revenues the last couple of years. Other questions? Yes, Senator, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure if we're at the point where you'd entertain a motion
I think we need to, I think, this has been probably discussed.
I'll just begin by saying I had reservations about this bill from the beginning because of the fact that it wasn't means tested. So the selling point of it is that it's universal, but that was something that I hesitated over. But I will say, over the last few months, Senator Saar has convinced me that it's a program whose merits go beyond just the meals themselves to the farmers and others involved. I'll say also I was impressed that both the Education Committee and the Agriculture Committee were glowing in their recommendations. So although I started in a place of hesitation, I would move the bill favorably from the committee.
You need to move the amendment to include the 20.
Yeah, and I'll second that.
This is on the amendment from Senator Booth. Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator Pershing.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr.
Yes.
Senator West, yes. Senator Kitchen.
Yes, on that.
That was on the amendment.
Yep.
Further move.
I'll second that. Any motion.
Writing a letter to the editor.
All right, Senator Booth.
Yes.
Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator Pershing.
Yes.
Senator Sears. Senator Starr.
Yes.
West, yes. Senator Kitchen.
Yes, to get the bill out, but I'm not sure how I'm voting on the floor.
Luckily, you vote for me.
And the reporter.
It's who has education, Senator Lewis.
All right.
So now we have 14 minutes thereabouts.
Oh, that education.